disgraced superstar, semi-pro football, prisoners as underdogs, a tune-up game for the ages. All this can only mean one thing. We're comparing the longest yard films on this episode of Retro versus Remake.
I'm Reggie Parker.
And I'm Dan Bulick, and welcome to another episode of
Retro versus Remake.
Alright, today's episode is The Longest Yard. The original Longest Yard was released in 1974. It was starring Burt Reynolds, Eddie Albert, Ed Lauter, James Hampton, and Michael Conrad. It was directed by Robert Aldrich. Screenplay by Terry Keenan Wynn. Music by Frank Duvall. Longest Yard in 2005, starring Adam Sandler, Chris Rock, James Cromwell, William Fichtner, and Burt Reynolds. Directed by Peter Segal. Screenplay by Sheldon Turner. Music by Teddy Casalucci. Alright, so the original Longest Yard is an original screenplay, but apparently there are a lot of parallels to a 1962 Hungarian film called Two Halftimes in Hell. It's based in World War II, and they play soccer. Just a brief synopsis, it's about Nazis versus their Hungarian prisoners. And it might be worth checking out just to see, maybe, if this movie apparently influenced the original.
Yeah.
But there are other remakes other than the 2005 film. There is a British remake called Mean Machine. That was released in 2001. Now, Guy Ritchie is the producer on this, and it stars Vinnie Jones and Jason Statham, and most of the other people from Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels. So it might be kind of worth checking that one out.
It might be worth checking out, for sure.
Yeah, if you want to see what Guy Ritchie, his take on this stuff. And there's also one more remake, an Egyptian remake, called Egypt's Captain, also released in 2005. I couldn't tell you anything about this because the Wikipedia page was not in English.
Were those films based on your classic football, as us Americans would call soccer?
Yeah, both of those movies were based on soccer. Yes, not American football at all.
Okay, so the original football in the remakes of the football movie. Did I Inception us just now? I think.
No, I got you. I followed you.
I think I broke everything.
So what's your first experience with either of these films? Which one did you see first?
I believe I saw the remake first. The Longest Yard original wasn't on my radar growing up. I didn't know much about it. But the remake, and we're going to get into this, had a cast that, definitely made you want to check it out. There was a lot of star power in the film. Like most movies, I don't think I caught it in theaters, but I did catch it on TV, HBO, something like that. Thought it was a pretty good film at the time. I thought it was really funny.
And when did you watch the original?
The original, later in life, I think. In high school and college, I took some film study classes, things of that nature. So I heard about the film, starring Burt Reynolds, and thought that, hey, the remake was interesting. Let's go back and sort of revisit this film. And I got a chance to look at it from more of a studying aspect than just watching it for fun.
Well, that'll definitely help this podcast, won't it?
It just might.
So I actually never saw either of these films until we decided to do it for this podcast. And of course I started with the original, and right after watched the remake. Popped my cherry with both of these in the same day.
There you go. Yeah, I know we were talking about doing this film because the Super Bowl was coming up, and we said, hey, why don't we watch a football movie? Because it was the football.
Yeah, it was football.
I had a bit of a background with it, so I was actually looking forward to you seeing the original because there was a lot of elements in that film that stuck with me, and I was interested to hear your take on it.
Yeah, and I had heard a lot about these movies, both of them, so I was really excited to finally see what everybody's talking about. But before we get into our discussion, I guess we'll go over a brief synopsis of both films. We are introduced to Paul Crewe in A Life of Luxury. He's a washed-up football player who got kicked out of the league for shaving points off games. He drunkenly steals his girlfriend's car. She then calls the cops, and they chase Crewe, arrest him, and he gets sent to prison. At prison, Crewe meets Captain Knauer. We learn the guards are in a semi-pro football team owned by the warden. Knauer tells him not to help the warden out with football, or else. Crew follows the orders and turns down the warden's offer to coach. After some troubles in prison, Crew decides that he will help the warden. The warden's team of prison guards needs help getting their season started. After taking Crew's advice, the warden orders Crew to put together a team with the cons, and Crew will be their quarterback. Crew complies as more time will be added to his sentence if he doesn't. Crew befriends Cons, Caretaker, a guy who can get anything, and Nate Scarborough, an old football player who can help Crew recruit people. They recruit all sorts of colorful characters. Most Cons are enticed by the opportunity to take out guards on the field. The Cons learn how to fight dirty, get medical records of the guards, and even learn to actually play football. The entire time, another inmate, Unger, is reporting everything to Captain Canaro. He's trouble at first, but then he's dealt with. Now discovered, Unger is desperate. He sabotages the Cons and kills Caretaker. On game day, the guards start beating Cons easily, but by the half, the Cons are pretty much caught up. At halftime, the warden tells Crew that if he doesn't throw the game, he will add more years to his sentence by saying that he was involved in Caretaker's murder. Crew complies under the stipulation that the other Cons will not get hurt once the warden has his lead. The second half of the game starts, and Crew throws the game. The guards are able to get the spread the warden wanted. Crew's teammates realizes he sold them out. The warden isn't true to his word, and the guards still hurt the Cons. Crew decides to go back in the game. After winning the trust of his teammates again, the Cons gain momentum, and after an intense second half, the Cons eventually win the game. The warden is pissed and sees Crew walking towards the exit. He tells Canaro to shoot Crew, but Crew was just getting the game ball. Crew gives the game ball to the warden and walks away victorious. So they're very similar. I was able to use a lot of the same names. Yeah, almost beat for beat, the remake's the same as the original.
Sure.
The differences, while there are plenty, they're a lot smaller than the typical remakes that we've already discussed.
I think where we see a lot of the differences in the movies are the cast themselves. There are roles that we're introduced to in the original that are reprised in this remake. They all sort of have their own flair to them. I think that's where you see the major differences in the films. The best place to start is with Paul Crew. Burt Reynolds' crew versus the Adam Sandler crew. You're getting similar characters, but the intros are quite different.
Yeah, you got Paul Wrecking Crew, which is Burt Reynolds, and then you got Paul Motley Crew, which is Adam Sandler. I noticed that little difference during the final football game. Yeah. I
think Wrecking works way better than Motley.
Well, I guess the Motley Crew wasn't around the 70s.
Sure.
So it wasn't as popular of a phrase.
The beginning of the original film might be one of the most intense intros to what ultimately mostly a comedy that I've ever seen. Burt Reynolds, Paul Crew, he's in his nice plush house with a lady of money, of wealth. He's sort of rehashing old football games and she's bored to death by it. Burt Reynolds' character is drunk and actually goes to the point of, let's just call it what it is. Within the first 3 minutes of the film, there's domestic violence. I think from the filmmaker's perspective, this intro to Paul Crew is really smart because she basically calls him a man whore, that he's a washed-up football player. He's reliving the glory days in a drunken stupor. So, this woman, she seems like a rich, older woman who she's telling Paul that she basically owns him, that he's almost like a trained pet. Quite literally calls him a whore, which I guess is where he's at right now in his life after football. He gets super pissed, mushes her in the face. I think mush is the proper term there.
Mush is putting it kindly.
Yeah, Mush is putting it kindly. Yeah, he beats the shit out of a woman on film and then proceeds to steal her car. I think it was a Maserati. You get the hard rock music. He's driving his car recklessly, and then I believe she calls the cops on him, and a police chase ensues. He doesn't give a shit about human life. There's so many scenes in that car chase of people having to jump out of the way of his car. It goes on for a long time, too. Multiple car crashes, multiple people almost losing their lives, and it ultimately ends with him, sort of wrecking out and getting taken to jail, hauled off to prison.
Well, he doesn't just get taken off. First, he rolls the car into the bay, and then he goes to a bar to get drunk more.
Ah, damn, you're right.
He gets into a fist fight with 2 cops. Then he goes to jail.
You're right. So the hero of your movie has beaten up a woman. He's driving drunk. He almost killed multiple people on the road. Wrecks his car. Decides, let me go grab a drink. And then beats up 2 cops before being hauled off to jail. I think he nailed it.
And he gets a measly 18 months for that. I was just like, no way that would happen today. You get at least 10 years for that.
That's a good point. And it sort of actually brings us to the remake Paul Crewe, who has a much higher sentence. But in the remake, you actually get an intro that's more of like a pool party, a luxurious sort of like Hollywood style. Socialites are all hanging out. You get introduced to Lena. In this situation, she has a name. I don't know if the woman in the original was named in the film, but at least in this in this film, the the woman that Paul Crewe is dating is actually named. She clearly is like a socialite, almost like a Real Housewife type of character. You get sort of the same picture. Paul Crewe reliving the glory days, watching football on TV. This woman who's pissed off that he's not entertaining her guests at the party. He basically tricks her into getting locked into a closet, steals her car, and you go on. How would you describe the car chase in the newer film?
Less endangerment of people's lives. I mean, it's a highly televised car chase. His girlfriend Lena, who's played by Courtney Cox, they're watching it on TV. They're watching this whole thing unfold. He gets pulled over by the cops. They want to bust him for drinking. And he says, nah, you hold this beer, I'm going to drink the rest of it. And then they start to chase him. All these cop cars start chasing him. He stops in the middle of an intersection, and then there's this huge cop car just piling up.
Yeah.
Like one car crashes after another. And then he looks a helicopter in the eye and breaks up with his girlfriend in the middle, or at the end of the chase.
Yeah, mid-chase, she calls him and says, don't get another scratch on my car. And he's like, how do you know I scratched your car? And he's like, well, it's on TV right now. So you get this big TV car chase. Everyone knows who's in the car, Paul Crewe, because he's a football guy. And they actually use that time to give us some exposition as an audience. You know, they actually introduce a concept that happens in both films of point shaving, but they actually introduce this idea that Paul Crewe has already been in trouble with the law in this remake. Honestly, why he does have a higher sentence here is because he's violating his parole. You know, if you're on parole and you're drunk driving and, you know, essentially assaulting cops with deadly weapons, which a car would be in this scenario, yeah, he gets a little bit more time. So instead of the 18 months that you see in the first film, I think he's in for 5 years.
Yeah, he's in for a lot longer. I don't exactly remember, but he's in for years as opposed to just 18 months.
Right.
And, you know, he didn't fight cops. He didn't beat his woman, which is a smart cut, I would say, for the remake, definitely. Getting rid of the domestic abuse was probably on the safer side. I can't really see Adam Sandler just beating a woman like that.
And honestly, for a modern audience, even though 2005, at this point, we're coming up on 14, 15 years ago, but even then, like, domestic violence would not have played well in a major motion picture that's supposed to be a comedy. So that's a really smart cut. The way that Paul Crewe in this movie is an asshole gives you more of that Sandler vibe of sort of lovable jerk, almost like a Big Daddy type of character, which, you know, he's always played well. Whereas the Burt Reynolds Paul Crewe is just kind of like he's a bruiser, you know. He's a tough guy that runs around and does whatever the hell he wants. Cause
he's a fighter. He pretty much fought the cops, where instead Adam Sandler just kept cracking jokes.
Yeah.
And the one cop was actually enjoying it. He's like, "What? I can't. It's Paul Crewe."
Yeah.
It's funny.
I actually liked in the first film that a lot of the exposition for Paul Crewe is when he's actually being processed in prison. So when they shave his mustache and they make allusions to his commercials where he shaved his mustache for $10,000 and they make a joke about shaving half of his face and that being like $5,000. Like that stuff where they introduce his background as he's being processed, I thought was a nice way to do it. But the remake does a great job of introducing pretty much everything you need to know right there in the car chase. So you don't need the sort of extra scenes to know all you need to know about Paul Crewe because it's all laid out right there in the intro.
Yeah, they get it out right away. You're not wondering about it. Sort of sprinkled in throughout the original. And I think that mustache scene might have just been because Burt Reynolds has like such a famous mustache that they have to bring attention to, hey, now it's getting shaved. And he probably did get $10,000 in filming that movie just to shave his mustache. So I feel like it might be like, this is what's really happening. He's getting $10,000 for this.
Yeah, I'm sure he got paid to cut that mustache because that was a big part of his persona as an actor. It must have been jarring for audience to see a clean cut Burt Reynolds, so I'm sure he was compensated, like you mentioned.
I mean, he's been clean cut before. In Deliverance, he didn't have a mustache.
Fair enough.
So it's not like it was unseen, but it's not often today, or especially probably films back then, where you actually see somebody like who's facial hair or hair in general just like on screen getting cut. You know.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one of those things like you better have your lighting right. You're only getting one take on that one.
Yeah, it's
So,
kind of like Natalie Portman when she got her head shaved in V for Vendetta or
sure.
something like that. You know.
Sure.
They're definitely sort of similar characters, but I think they play to each actor's strength.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know, Adam Sandler, like you said, he's kind of more a little snarky in a somewhat charming way. Burt Reynolds is just more of like this macho guy, and they both play into that with their versions of Paul Crewe. So it's sort of extensions of just who the actor is, really.
Absolutely. Sandler is cracking jokes throughout the whole time. A lot of the ways that he interacts with the prisoners initially, whereas Burt Reynolds is sort of like the man on the outside, which, you know, both of them are. They're superstars. They're pro football players, so there's some animosity with the general population because who does this guy think he is? But where Burt Reynolds sort of leaned into that "leave me alone" attitude,
Yeah, I got more of a loner vibe from him too.
yeah, Sandler. I mean, the way he sort of interacts and gets guys on his side are more fun situations. Like at one point, he's playing ping pong with a guy to recruit him for the football team. You know, he's plays sports with the other guys and cracks jokes throughout the film. So he comes across as more inviting of a character when it comes to interacting with other prisoners.
Yeah, I was gonna say he just, in general, even though he's kind of like a loner, but he says he doesn't really have friends, but he is the more fun crew to be around. I feel like like you said, he's cracking jokes. He's sort of playing games with the other prisoners. You don't see Burt Reynolds' crew doing that as much as Sandler's. Not to put anything against what Reynolds did, but you could see the differences that, like, oh yeah, this guy's just maybe a little more fun.
Yeah, Burt Reynolds, first time you see him sort of laughing with the inmates is like halfway through a fight scene.
Yeah, exactly. He needs to fight in order to feel relaxed.
Yeah, it's like, all right, we've challenged each other as men, and this is actually a fun scenario. So let's laugh in the mud.
As long as I know I'm with another man,
yeah,
it's okay to laugh now.
It's like, all right, now that everyone knows I can kick this guy's ass, it's okay for us to be friends. Yeah, there's a more of a machismo that's in the first film.
Yes, machismo, definitely.
This kind of starts getting into more of like a breakdown of what happens in the film. But Paul's admission of his crime, you know, before going into jail.
Right, the shaving of the points.
Yeah, the point shaving. Where in the first film, you know, it's implied that he's point shaving, and you know it's addressed a little bit, but like Sandler's Paul Crewe directly to his men, to the football crew, he admits to wrongdoing that I think serves the movie really well to have this admission of the point shaving. I think the way it was done in the remake was smart. So I think as a character seeking redemption, you see a little bit more of a chance at redemption for the Adam Sandler Paul Crewe than you get with Burt Reynolds.
Well, he does admit to cheating, but he doesn't until the very end. Up to that point, he sort of said, "We saw the papers. I'm innocent."
Yeah.
So he was kind of feigning all that. He was saying that he was innocent. It wasn't until the very end when I guess he needed that dramatic moment with his teammates to win the game, and it does pay off in the remake, definitely.
Definitely a payoff there.
And as opposed to the original, where you guess he's pretty much guilty. I don't think he was kind of playing with it. I think he is guilty. Everybody knows he's guilty. And then there's this one moment with Caretaker, which isn't in the remake, where he's like, "Why'd you do it?" And then he goes into this long backstory about, like, you know, the only thing I ever loved was my dad, but he was blind, so he was never able to see me play football. And I thought maybe if I can get enough money, I can get one big score, then I can take care of him the rest of my life. And then son of a bitch went up and died on me.
Yeah.
And then he's like, "Nah, that's bullshit." He's like, "Why do you think I did it?" "Well, for the money, of course."
Yeah.
So there's a funny moment there. So that's absolutely a joke, right? He wasn't doing it for his dad. He just did it for the money.
I think that the film lets you sort of play with that concept. I think ultimately there was some sort of element with his father, but you know, it can play as a joke as well. So I think because he's such a tough guy, that maybe he's hiding behind the joke and he's not really expressing his feelings. Where I think, like you mentioned, the payoff of Sandler doing the reveal to the entire team, essentially to the entire inmate population, makes him vulnerable in a way that I don't think you're going to get from a Burt Reynolds take on a character, you know. The
Yeah.
vulnerability doesn't really come from emotions as opposed to actually sort of conceding ground by like not being tough for a moment. That's as close as you're gonna get to like human emotion from a tough guy like that. Whereas Adam Sandler is like, hey, look, I did it. I made a mistake, and I think it serves his version of Crew very well for not only the audience but also in the context of the film, the people that he's trying to work with, the people that have inspired him during this prison run. So it's subtle difference, but I think it plays well to both their characters. The way we sort of reveal point shaving.
Yeah, maybe if Burt Reynolds was fighting Caretaker at the time, he might have
Yeah,
revealed what really happened. But
yeah,
I guess not.
perhaps. In a way, that's sets the framework for the entire film, and both characters in their intros give you the tone of the movie right away. So like Burt Reynolds, he'll do anything. He'll punch a woman. He'll steal a car. He'll fight a cop. He'll do anything, and really for not much reason. It doesn't take much to set that guy off. Whereas Sandler, he's has made a mistake, which we ultimately find out at the end. But really, he's just a guy who clearly liked football. His time has passed, and he has this black stain on his career. And sort of his response to it is to sort of joke around and play coy with it. By doing so, it sets this comedic tone that permeates throughout the film. Both of those characters do a great job of framing their particular movies. Even though they hit a lot of the same beats, they are different films just from a character perspective. I think ultimately what makes these two movies so different are the characters in the film. If you wanted to talk about the rest of the cast.
So let's talk about some of the other cast members then.
The warden, I think, is a good place to start with these characters because there is a slight different motivation to the wardens in the two films, and what their ultimate end game is.
Yeah, let's start there. In the original, the warden's played by Eddie Albert, and in the remake, the warden is played by James Cromwell. So we do have slightly different takes on the warden here. In the remake, he has political gains that he's trying to get, or political aspirations, and he sort of mentions a governorship, right?
Yeah, he's sort of known. They introduced the concept that he's known as a reformer in the state. Like he has some interesting takes on how to run his prison, and it's made him sort of a public figure. And he's trying to parlay that into ultimately running for, like you said, the office of governor in the state. So for him, he's looking at his interaction with the prisoners and ultimately like these football teams as a way to jumpstart his career in politics.
And is the original warden, is he just doing it because he has his football team and really just wants to get it going or something?
Yeah,
his motivation wasn't as clear to me.
It's not as clear. The original warden, he has his football team, and I think really more so for fun. He wants to be able to show off that he has a good semi-pro football team.
Oh yeah, we should also talk about just quickly before we get too deep into that, like where they're located. Like the remake, it takes place in Texas. Texas, big football state, right? Everywhere. So
Absolutely.
It makes sense that the warden would have his own football team, even though he's a warden of a prison. But yeah, football makes sense. The original, I guess, takes place in Florida?
It seems like Florida. I mean, you're definitely either in Florida or somewhere a bit swampy. I'm not really getting a lot of accents, so I'm not placing anyone in like a Louisiana type area. So Florida seems to make sense, and Florida's a big football state too. Depending on where you are, so it would make sense that there would be a semi-pro football team at a prison, I guess.
Why not?
Seen it a million times.
Jail in Florida. Why not join a football team while you're there?
I guess location, it doesn't make as much sense for someone to be really trying to be a governor based off of that experience. But I think what we're seeing in the original film is that this guy, most of the football team seems to be really just to show off that he has a football team, and he wants to sort of show Paul Crew that, hey, my guys could run with the big boys, professional level teams, which isn't really true, but this guy has that delusion. But really, what's interesting about him in the football is that a lot of this has to do with power structure at the prison. He talks a lot about control and sort of using different tactics to keep the prison population under control.
Yeah, he has this one scene with Knauer where he's just walking through the prison or outdoors in the prison. He's like, I know nobody's attacking us right now. It's kind of a funny moment because we got 15 guns aimed at them.
Yeah.
No, because I have power, I have control, and I'm going to use this football game to show everybody.
Right.
So for him, it is definitely about this power, having control over it.
In both situations, the Wardens are on a power trip. There is a scene in the original where like the Warden's buddy towards the end of the game is like, how's your power theory now? Like he talks about that concept pretty openly there that, you have all these theories about how to control people. He does, in that situation, have a lot to lose in his football game because if the inmates feel like they have some agency over themselves, some control of what's going on in the situation, it could completely undermine his ability to do his job. So there's a big risk there for him. Whereas in the new film, the risk really is, okay, you could get embarrassed by this like loudmouth football guy and lose any chance of ever holding like a high political office. The motivation is different, but like you said, that first film is a little more ambiguous and it seems to be really just based on how much control I can take from other people. Not so much the outside world itself.
Which one do you think any warden was nastier or more evil? In both movies, Unger, he's another inmate. He's sort of a spy for Knauer.
Right.
And in both films, he's easily discovered. In the original, Crew goes to the warden and says, I need you to do something because Unger just keeps reporting. And then the warden says, okay, I'll take care of it.
Right.
But in the remake, the warden just goes, you'll have my answer tomorrow. And then he has all the guards just like hose down the field so it's completely muddy to ruin their practice. That's kind of a dirtbag move right there by the...
Yeah, it's weird because honestly they're fairly even when it comes to how, I guess, evil they can be. It seems like the warden in the original, for the most part, except for sort of the double cross at the game, for the most part sort of employs like an arbitrary honor system when it comes to football. He pretty much keeps most of his promises when it comes to letting them train and letting them get ready for the football game. Whereas there's a little bit more shiftiness in the remake. Like you said, he hoses down the field. Some of the tactics that he employs, he really doesn't seem to really care about the football itself, but more about what the football can do for him. Whereas in the original film, this guy is obsessed with football. I mean, like, that's one of his character traits. He has a lot of honor around that, but then he turns the switch at the end where he's quite ready to kill.
Yeah. It almost came out of nowhere for me in the original. I was like, whoa, this guy just wants blood now.
Yeah. And I think in the remake, the warden is sort of shifty throughout. So, when he wants to shoot Crew at the end, it's not as shocking of a, character motivation. It doesn't, it's not that shocking. But also the way he does it is a little more reasonable. I mean, if you're going to shoot a guy, you got to do it reasonably, am I right? He's basically, he sees this guy walking off and, he's ultimately, I guess, trying to protect the public. It doesn't seem like he really just wants to murder him, but he is afraid that this guy's going to escape. Trying to shoot a guy who's going to be in jail for 5 years over a guy that's going to be there for 18 months. I think there's a little bit of weight there as well. Like, super overkill. If a guy is probably going to be out of jail within the next, 6 months, trying to murder him in cold blood because you lost a football game is crazy. So I'm going to lean towards the original guy being more evil in the aggregate, but sort of throughout the film, I would say most of the film, I get a more evil vibe from the remake warden.
That makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Actually, no, you just remind me of a Knauer moment. So we've been talking a lot about not just the warden, but his captain, Knauer, portrayed by two different actors. In the original, he was portrayed by Ed Lauter. In the remake, he's portrayed by William Fichtner. Now, these two characters are pretty much the same. They're pretty much just tormenting Paul Crewe as much as possible, and their motivations are pretty much the same in both movies, too. So I don't know if there's too much of a difference there with those guys. There is one major difference that I definitely noticed, and it's at the end of the movie, after the football game, yeah. Mm-hmm. After the football game, before the almost attempted murder.
Right.
In the remake, Knauer goes up to Paul Crewe. They almost have like a end of Karate Kid. You're all right, LaRusso. Yeah. They have that kind of moment.
Yeah, I did notice that.
Canower actually goes up to him and goes, "Hey, don't worry. I know you had nothing to do with Caretaker's death." So it seems like there's not going to get any more years added to Paul Cruz's sentence. That doesn't happen in the original. You don't get a scene between those two. So I left the original movie assuming that Burt Reynolds is going to get an extra 25 years, while Adam Sandler is just going to do the 3 to 5, whatever his original sentence was. So a little more of a friendly Canower in the remake than in the original.
Yeah, Canower in both films. I mean, pretty much they live and die by a stick. I mean, they're basically just beating this guy up. In both films, Paul Cruz just gets knocked around by Canower quite a bit, to the point that one of the Paul Cruz stipulations in both films is for the warden to call off Canower, because Canower's making his stay like a living hell. You know, he's throwing him in the hot box, he's beating him up. It would be pretty difficult to run training for a football game if you had a guy like that on your back. Both of them, like you mentioned, have that similar character beats where like that's pretty much their motivation. They don't like Paul Cruz because he's like this hotshot who actually, because of his football experience, sort of undermines Canower's role as, you know, a leader of the football teams. So
yeah, he's the captain, and I feel like he probably feels threatened that maybe Cruz will be captain because he's actually played in professional football, you know?
Right. And, you know, just based on both Canower's interactions with prisoners, you know, they look at prisoners as obviously like less than. So here comes someone from this population that he doesn't ultimately respect that's going to undermine his authority. I will say this, the casting on the remake, pretty good. They have very similar looks, both your Canowers in both films. Similar looks, similar motivation, but I think you're right. That one minor difference at the end, actually, one, it lets you know that your character is going to be fine, that he's not going to get extra time because Canower's going to back him up. Whereas in the first film, you sort of just get that, all right, walk away, freeze frame situation. Like, let's not worry about any loose ends because it's all good now. But yeah, I think that's a smart addition to have that specter of, are you going to do more time, gone. Kind of lets the audience feel relief about how the film ended.
Yeah, it gives it more of a feel-good feeling at the end.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Ed Lauter, who played the original Canower, he does cameo in the remake. Mm-hmm. He's at the golf course telling Adam Sandler's crew that, hey, you had sex with my wife before I met her. It's pretty funny. It's really cool to have him there.
Yeah.
See him in a lighter mood than he was in the original.
Mm-hmm.
That's for sure.
I'm a fan of what both actors did, and I will say that for the remake, I've got to respect his ability to sort of embody the spirit of a character that was previously played by another person. I think he did a good job and hit a lot of the same beats. It's different, but it feels the same. It feels the same. So I think he did a great job.
I think we'll be saying that a lot about this movie. It's different, but it feels the same.
Yeah. 'Cause I'll say the biggest departure for me, in terms of new characters, I feel like the caretaker character, that's a mouthful, but the caretakers in both films are very different. I mean, they do ultimately the same thing. They're able to get contraband and they're able to help recruit people for the football teams. But so who's the caretaker in the original film?
The caretaker in the original was played by James Hampton, and caretaker in the remake, of course, played by Chris Rock.
Caretaker in the original is a source of a lot of the jokes. He's really good at guiding the Paul Cruz character through sort of the prison system, introducing them to different characters, and ultimately, like, without Caretaker, there's no way this football game happens or goes well. So
I sort of equivocated him, even though the movie came out way after the original. It's like kind of like Red in Shawshank Redemption. He can get anything you want. So that's sort of what I thought of him as.
Yeah.
In both movies.
Totally agree. Where obviously it's Chris Rock in the remake, so they really use him wisely and have him doing a lot of jokes.
Yeah, again, kind of going back to having Paul Cruz, Adam Sandler, and Burt Reynolds just be themselves. It's kind of like, it's just like Chris Rock be Chris Rock, and you got a comedy, great.
Yeah.
Because Chris Rock can do that for you. So, good idea to cast Chris Rock in your movie right there.
Absolutely. Chris Rock does the line that, you know, the original actor does where He says, if you would have robbed the bank, beat up your mom, stuff like that, that would have been, we could have forgiven that as prisoners. But like point shaving, that's messed up. Chris Rock basically does sort of the same speech, but he adds like, you could have smoked crack. You could have, there's a funnier on brand comedy that comes from Chris Rock's Caretaker. It does help a lot because the tone of the newer film is lighter throughout. It helps move along a lot of comedy to have a comedian such as Chris Rock playing a major character.
Yeah, he's definitely funnier in the remake because it's Chris Rock, right? You can't go wrong there with the comedy. But yeah, like you said, he's pretty much hitting the same notes, but he's doing it with his own flavor, with his own tone, and you got a lot more jokes, which is good. You need that for your comedy.
Yeah, jokes per minute.
JPMs.
Yeah. Now here, do we want to get into the deaths?
How he died? Yeah, we can talk about the death scenes really quickly.
Yeah.
So, both movies, Caretaker is taken out by this Unger character. Unger, who we learned is this pyromaniac guy. So, Caretaker gets a very violent, fiery death in both. So, in both films, Unger goes to Crew's room. In the original, I'll do this the best way I can. He goes, unscrews the light bulb, and injects a liquid into it.
Yeah.
I'm not exactly sure what liquid it is, but okay. So then Caretaker goes in, turns his light on, and then just everything explodes.
Yeah.
He's immediately on fire. Caretaker shuts the prison doors or something. What do they call them? The cell.
Yeah, the cell door.
Cell doors, so nobody can get to him. In the remake, which is an interesting choice, Unger doesn't try to kill Caretaker. He actually sabotages Paul Crew's radio. And we get a little tease of Chris Rock, his Caretaker, turning on the light bulb, and you think, oh, that's how he's going to die, because that's how he died in the original.
Right.
But nope, he lives there, and then it's when he turns the radio on, when that explodes, and he dies a fiery death as the cell door is also shut.
Yeah. You have these two scenes, which are really powerful. They're turning points in the films. You have this character that we've all come to get to know and like as an audience. And I would say, honestly, for me, more so Chris Rock, because of how much comedy he's doing, because of how much personality he has that star power. So he's featured quite a bit in the remake. I personally, I was nervous when he goes to flick the light on, because like I just watched the original. I was like, oh damn, like how are they going to address this? He goes to flick the light and that doesn't kill him. So I'm like, oh, maybe they don't, because I hadn't watched the movie in a while. I was like, oh, maybe they don't take him out here. Maybe there's like a different way they approach this. And nope, exploding radio. But
I knew he was gonna die in the remake when they were having kind of the heart-to-heart moment. He's like, "Here's a picture of my mom. I want to show you." I was like, "Oh, he's gonna die in this remake. There's no way he's making it out."
That's fair. I mean, in both films, it's a graphic death. But in that original, just the way they filmed that is insane. You actually hear the guy screaming. It's a prolonged scene. You can hear the inmates frantically trying to get someone to bring a key to open the door. So the way that he's killed in the original film, there's so much weight to it, because it's like, wow, that is dark. It's crazy that somebody would do that to another person. You still get the death in the new film, and they shoot in a different way that's just, you can kind of keep a PG-13 rating if you wanted to. I think you still have this moment where you care about the Caretaker character, but that first film, the way they take him out it's heavy.
I'll give that to you. It was definitely brutal in the first film, but the effect of him being on fire, which is great, it's a great practical effect, but it almost sort of just kind of came out of nowhere, because like first the light just like kind of sparks, and then immediately he's on fire. So for me, that was just like, I know because it's an older movie, but it did seem like a little like a jump cut.
Yeah,
you could tell like it took me out of the moment just a little bit.
I can see that.
It's like, oh wow, now he's just on fire immediately, as opposed to the remake where you can do special effects for that explosion.
Sure.
So it looks more real, I suppose. But so I was just a little distracted in the original because of the jump cut from a little spark to man me immediately on fire.
No, that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, it worked, I'm sure, for the 70s, but that was one of the things I'm like, oh, the remake's definitely going to make this look better. And it did.
They definitely did. They definitely did. You're talking about a modern audience and you're talking about a comedy, there's no need for a overly graphic death of a popular American comedian. So I think you know it's like, all right, well, damn, they blew Chris Rock up. We are comparing these characters. I'm giving the edge to Chris Rock. Just we're more connected to him by the time of his death. So yeah, you're right. Even though one death comes across as more graphic, there's more gravity to the death in the new film because Chris Rock, for me at least, more liked by the audience.
Yeah, he's more prominent. He's a more likable character. He's constantly cracking jokes, right? He's sort of the light-hearted guy in this heavy, dark place. So
Sure.
you want to cling to those types of characters.
Absolutely.
So his death, yeah, experiencing that death, that's definitely a heavy loss because there goes a lot of the levity in the
Sure.
film.
Sure.
I will give it to the original in one part though, like in the beginning before they're really friends, where Burt Reynolds is really tired from all the make work,
Sure.
and then he's kind of like stumbling to try to talk to the guards, and then Caretaker does kind of make fun of him. He's like, "Twinkle, twinkle, little superstar," or something like that.
Yeah.
I forget exactly what he says, but I just thought that was it's interesting. I thought this was a nice guy, but he's not exactly entirely nice, but it just gives him a little bit of an edge in the original.
Yeah.
But I still like Chris Rock's portrayal, of course, because he's a lot funnier.
Yeah,
that's for sure.
Absolutely.
And, yeah, it's Chris Rock, right?
Yeah.
Can't go wrong there.
It would probably take us all day to go character by character going forward because there are so many different characters in the film.
Maybe we could just talk about one more character.
Okay.
And I'm talking about Nate Scarborough, the old timer who helps crew assemble the team. So let's talk about that. In the original, Nate Scarborough is played by Michael Conrad, and in the remake, Nate Scarborough is played by Burt Reynolds.
Burt Reynolds.
Look at that. Burt Reynolds in the original and the remake.
Yeah.
Sweet.
Very nice touch.
That immediately is just like, of course you cast Burt Reynolds as the older guy helping out the younger guy. That just makes perfect sense. Brilliant casting right there.
Absolutely. Scarborough in both films, in the original, just how much he's able to help Burt Reynolds whip his team into shape. It's great. I don't know. I don't have major notes for the character. I think he comes across well. I'm actually going to stop talking. Do you have something you want to say about Nate Scarborough? Because I don't have a lot on the original. Maybe you do.
On the original Nate Scarborough, I mean, he's sort of just like the mentor guy, kind of just helps crew out a lot. He doesn't really do too much. He doesn't have too much comedy. He does play at the end of the game. That's really where I noticed more of a difference between the two Nate Scarboroughs.
Sure.
Is how they're used in the football game at the end. In the original, after crew decides that he wants to win the game, Nate Scarborough is the first teammate to actually help crew out, and he gets the first touchdown to sort of get the Mean Machine back their momentum.
Sure.
But in the remake, Nate Scarborough, played by Burt Reynolds, he's the one that gets the final touchdown, and he's able to sort of almost get the same touchdown. He gets the touchdown almost in the same style that he got it in the original, that last touchdown. He kind of just dives in and takes a shot crossing the end zone line, getting that final touchdown for the team. So he was a pretty decent character in the original. The fact that he's played by Burt Reynolds in the remake just, raises his...
Puts it over the top.
His importance. Yeah, exactly. It's just so cool to see Burt Reynolds in this movie. It's a sign to, it's like, hey, I'm fine with this remake. You guys should be too. I'm in it. It's okay.
Yeah.
Almost like a hint, nudge, nudge to us,
Absolutely. But yeah, Scarborough in both films plays sort of a moral compass. At the end, this idea of, hey, all these people are putting a lot of trust into you and you're betraying their trust. There's this moment where Paul Crewe can fall back in these old habits of, not caring about others. He's willing to, which, in both films, point shaving is worse than most other crimes to the inmates. These are scandals, thieves, murderers, but when you betray the national sport, that's the biggest crime. And at this moment where Paul Crewe could just kind of throw his hands up and try to save himself, Scarborough is one of the big reasons why he he actually makes a turn and realizes that what he's doing is wrong. Both Scarboroughs do a good job of it, but I think the Burt Reynolds push to get Paul Crewe to get back in the game and to take care of the team, I think was done a little bit better in the remake. Honestly, just glad to have him in the movie because I think it really elevated, like you mentioned, the film.
Yeah, definitely. That's one of the things I appreciate about the remake. It knows the source material. It loves the source material, so it wants to be as true to it as much as possible and wants to pay respect to it as much as possible. And I can't see paying more respect than having the lead of the original in your remake. I think that's a huge way to pay respect to the original.
Absolutely.
You got one more?
We could do characters all day, but I think one of the last sort of major characters that I think we should discuss in the original film, and this is one of the times where we actually changed names a little bit and sort of changed the character around. In the original film, it's Granville. Granville is played by Harry Caesar. And in the newer film, sort of his equivalent would be Nelly.
Nelly, oh.
Nelly playing Megget. So, not really sure why there was a name change there, but okay, I'll take it. But
I feel like Granville is almost like grandfather, maybe? Because he was an older, he's an older guy in the original. He's Nelly in the remake.
Very true. Yes, he's an older guy in the original. Because both movies do play with race relations, which comes into play when you're in a prison population. Race matters even more than it does in general society when you're in jail, because people tend to stick with people that look like them, people of similar backgrounds. You know, it's addressed in both movies that, hey, you know, if you're going to have a football team, you're going to probably want to get people of different backgrounds, to be politically correct, of different backgrounds to help you with your football team. So Granville is the first black guy. Granville is the first black guy to sort of cross the line and play football with Paul Crewe. And Nelly, in his role, is Megget. And same thing where for Adam Sandler, they play basketball. And Nelly's like, hey, if he's willing to take shots like that playing basketball, I'll play football with this guy. And both the characters, it's implied that they're pretty good at football, because Unger ends up telling the prison guards that in the original, of course, it's Granville, and in the remake, it's Megget, but he tells the prison guards, hey, this guy's got talent, he's athletic. So they target him. And you get almost the same beat for beat scene in both films where the prison guards come up to Nelly in the remake, of course, and Granville in the original. Comes up to him in the library and pushes their books down and really tries to embarrass them in front of other people to try to pick a fight, try to, you know, jeopardize their role in the football game. I think in both films it's a powerful scene. It really plays off of race relations. You know, there's racial slurs that are thrown at the character, and it really tests the patience and the control of the characters in the film, and it's a turning point for the other black inmates because they see one of their own being disrespected, and it brings the rest of the black characters into the film to participate in the football game. For sure, Nelly comes across as more athletic to me when I'm watching the films. So, you know, I feel a little more. I feel it's a little more realistic that he could inspire the crew to really come together and play, because he's already clearly pretty good at football. Whereas Granville, you know, they tell me he's pretty good. I'm not really seeing the physical attributes that I would expect, but okay. But I think that library scene is important in both films, and really one of the few times where the remake goes pretty hard in the paint when it comes to race, because like Steve Austin throws out quite the slur.
I mean, they throw out the N-word in both films.
Yeah.
I don't know. I do like the scene. I think it actually, for me, I think it played a little bit stronger in the original.
I think so as well.
I think the older Granville, because when they start picking on him, they both kind of just, in both films, they're just knocking books off and making him pick it up. And then he sort of, his response is he kind of goes into this almost like former slave kind of voice, like, oh no, don't worry, boss. Like, you know, he's playing it really dumb. And just to not provoke these cops, because obviously you don't want to get in a fight with these cops. Sure. Especially if you're a black guy, you know.
Yeah, of course.
Race relationships there. And So for him to go like, oh, don't worry about it, mister, like he's doing that voice, and then when Nelly did it, I didn't buy it as much
doesn't make a
because
lot of sense.
nobody talks like that. Like maybe
Right.
in the '70s, like you can maybe see like an older guy kind of talking like that because he's been around like that kind of weird racism where white people expected you to talk like that.
Yeah.
But it's almost like coming from Nelly. It almost seems like almost like mocking. So I didn't buy it as
Right.
much as I bought Granville doing that kind of voice. And I really thought they were going to mess up Granville. I was just like so worried.
Right.
Like, oh my God.
Yeah, Granville, because it's an older film, being filmed in the South has more weight in that context, that the race relations were not nearly as progressive as they were in the North. So it would make sense that you hit this sort of survival instinct, like you mentioned, of sort of just going along to get along. He goes into this voice of, oh shucks, I don't want any trouble, basically. You're right. Like it does feel more ominous in the first film. Like you really could see somebody get messed up here because there really wouldn't be much recourse for Granville in that scenario, especially because he's black. It's like taking a prisoner aspect of it and escalating to quite an extent. And you're right. To me, it played a lot better in that first film in the way that the other prisoners seeing Granville being disrespected like that brought them into the game and participating in the football game. I think you're right. It played well in the first movie, whereas and maybe this is why there's a name change and things along those lines. Whereas Nelly gives me more of like the athlete. You definitely want this guy on your team vibe. Less so, okay, like he's being disrespected in a racial way, but you're right. It doesn't hold the same weight. The scenes aren't. They're similar, but they're not equivalent.
Yeah, I could think of maybe two reasons why the original plays a little bit heavier.
Mm-hmm.
One is there's sort of separation of the races
Yes.
in the original. When they're doing make work in the beginning, you see all the white convicts, and then in a separate truck, all the black convicts come out. So I didn't really understand why they had to bring them out in separate cars, but that's what they did apparently.
Yeah.
So you already get the sense of like the separation of the races in the original.
Right.
And
well, it's a big deal. It's a big deal that Burt Reynolds is chained to a black inmate to do work like that. That really apparently wasn't common. So it was almost like in a way to disrespect Burt Reynolds by chaining him to an African American inmate for work. So yeah, race clearly in that film was way heavier.
Yeah. And the other reason I think is because in the remake, as much as I love Chris Rock, because now you already have like a black guy kind of with Paul Crewe, so Nelly joining two isn't as impactful as when Granville's like the lone black guy,
right?
Who's with Paul Crewe. So there's a lot more weight with his decision to join Paul, as opposed in the remake where okay, there's already another black guy, so it's okay. It's not as we're not as separated here,
sure,
as certainly the original.
Yeah.
So yeah, Granville plays more of a role of bridging that gap than Nelly does.
I agree.
For sure.
Yeah, and even like Chris Rock kind of throws out the line that he's like, even though he's black, he's like the last guy to get picked, and like if you did pick him, you're like, oh damn, I didn't get an athletic black guy. And it's like, sure that line tries to explain why he's there and the rest of the black inmates aren't, but you're right, it doesn't. It's not the same on any real level because the race tension isn't there the way it is in the first film. So.
But it makes sense in the remake because you do want Chris Rock with the hero. You want that comedy. You want that humor. So you don't want to keep Chris Rock separated. So I get why they did it in the remake.
No.
It makes absolutely sense to me.
Absolutely. And it really is powerful to make Caretaker such a major character, such a major actor in the remake. So yeah, Chris Rock, I believe, was used perfectly in the new film. It may have taken away from some of the weight of the Granville / Megget portion of it, but that doesn't break the movie in any way. It just sort of takes away some of the racial tension, which honestly you're not going to be able to recreate anyway because of time and setting.
And also, I mean, it's a PG-13 movie. It doesn't need to get too heavy
with
the race and everything. So maybe we could talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
The ratings. The original movie rated R.
Okay.
The remake rated PG-13.
Sure.
Did the remake lose anything by not being rated R? What do you think?
I'm gonna say no, because what you're dealing with here is a comedy. Rated R back then, there's really not a lot of reasons that I can think of for the first film to be rated R other than clearly punching a woman. Uh, and I guess some of the language, and I guess of the violent murder, of course. But like, if you take out punching a lady, you know, if you take out the violent murder, because there's other ways to sort of portray that, there's not really a real reason it needs to be rated R.
I think they just dropped a lot more F bombs in the original. That's it. That's the only reason, really, I think, that it's rated R.
Pretty much. So.
Broke his fucking neck, which is a funny joke.
That is a funny...
I really like that joke, and I missed it. I knew they couldn't do that in the PG-13 movie.
Yeah.
Broke his fucking neck.
Yeah. That was. I believe they switched line that he shit his pants.
Yeah, shit his pants. Funny, but not as funny as I think I broke his fucking neck. He broke his fucking neck.
Yeah.
It's hilarious. It's good stuff.
Yeah, the language, I'm sure, for a prison environment is a little more authentic with all the F-bombs and things along those lines, but it doesn't fundamentally change the film.
No, it definitely doesn't take away that they're not cursing. It's still, you're following the same beats. You still got some pretty good jokes in there.
Mm-hmm.
There's not really any topic, I guess, that they avoided because of a PG-13 rating. So for me, the PG-13 rating worked fine.
Yeah, I agree. And honestly, in one of the few scenes where there's sexuality involved, they kind of get more in depth in the remake. Oh my god! In the first film, the secretary. I guess we gotta talk about this, man. The secretary in the first film was Bernadette Peters, plays the warden's secretary. I don't know the new film yet.
Oh, that's I believe it's Cloris Leachman plays
Cloris
secretary.
Leachman.
Yeah,
wow.
She's been in a few Adam Sandler movies, so it's not surprising that you would see her here again.
Absolutely. So there's this scene where to get the game footage in both films, the Paul Crew character has to hook up with the secretary in the warden's office. In the first film, Bernadette Peters' hair is absolutely insane, to the point where Burt Reynolds makes a joke about, have you ever found spiders? And she's got this crazy updo. They go to the office for the game footage, and the price to get the game footage is 15 minutes with the stud athlete, which fits the Burt Reynolds character more, because it's implied from the beginning of the film that he's essentially a man whore. So for him to, I guess, be used by a woman in that way makes sense. He's been in that territory before. The newer film, Adam Sandler, is just played to much more comedic effect. They somehow get footage of him hooking up with Cloris Leachman, and there's a lot of shenanigans that are going on in that scene.
Yeah, because she's loved him when he was younger and posed in his underwear for these ads, so she kind of has him posing again in his underwear and spanking him and doing all these demeaning things that you don't want anybody to know that he did, or especially you don't want anybody to see, and all the other inmates see it, and it's this huge, hilarious scene that pays off pretty well. I was hoping that they would do something to up what the original did, because I didn't think that the original was that funny. It's he's gonna have sex with her, who he kind of hit on anyway.
Right.
So I guess again goes back to that machismo.
Right.
Burt Reynolds gonna have sex with the woman, the only woman in this movie, and you got Adam Sandler. I was kind of hoping though that Cloris Leachman would kind of do the same thing, and he'd have to have sex with her.
Yeah.
I was oh, tell me they're going there with this.
Absolutely.
But I think what they did was still pretty funny.
I think the setup is there more in the first film, because at first, he's kind of cracking jokes about her, but then he, speaking of rated R, he asks her if she's ever done it standing up, which I'm sure at the time was probably a pretty raunchy line. And you see her kind of sort of, I guess, envisioning what it'd be like to hook up with Burt Reynolds, Paul Crew in that moment. So when they ultimately do come back and that scene happens, it makes a lot of sense. Whereas this in the remake, I felt like they were matching the beat, Like I know she mentioned the underwear model stuff, but like it seemed like they were just it was there to sort of match the fact that it happened in the first film, but they used that opportunity. It's like, all right, well, we should hit on this sort of big moment in the first film, but let's use it to make more jokes, which I think is what the movie does really well. That they say, all right, well, we got to do this anyway, but it can be fun.
Yeah, it could be funnier. And she did also. She was looking through an old '90s magazine, an old '90s People magazine, where she actually saw an ad of him in his underwear, just kind of oogling him with her eyes. So I think they did it well enough in the remake. It didn't take me by surprise.
Yeah.
I knew they had to do the joke again. Like I said, I was hoping that he would actually have to have sex with her.
Yeah.
Didn't quite do that. Hey, I thought that would have been funny because it was like he has sex with her, and then he's like, "What? I had to do it." And then like I thought maybe he would see her later, and they'd kind of like wink at each other, like, "Hey, let's do that again." That would have been really funny if he wanted more.
Yeah.
Oh man, but that's just my version of the movie. It's still funny.
It's
what they do in the remake.
It's funny because it really does play off of just the jokey nature of the film. Like he's just posing and they're like romping around and you know like perhaps they had sex, maybe they did, maybe they didn't, but you know, I think you still get the general idea out of it, and it makes for a fun moment in the film.
Yeah, and I also can't see Adam Sandler doing the Burt Reynolds thing where, oh yeah, I'm just gonna bang this hot receptionist now. It doesn't work with Adam Sandler.
Right.
But what they did with Adam Sandler definitely works. So that was a smart choice.
You had to do that over again. Honestly, the big thing that you had to do over was football. They had to play some football in this movie. What'd you think, man? Between the two films,
it's the '70s, right? So watching that old '70s football, I'm sure that was pretty entertaining way to watch it back in the day. Yeah. But when I was watching the original, I was like, they're gonna do this better in the remake, right? That's what I just kept thinking in my head because while it's I'm sure it's some good football action they had in that original movie. Compared to what we've seen today cinematically, it definitely doesn't hold a candle. Even what we see in regular football games today, it's not as impressive. Yeah, I think the remake definitely did much better with the filming of the football scenes than the original. Definitely.
I'll say I was impressed in the first film with how it was shot in the sense of you see a lot of continuous action. A lot of it looks like realistic. Obviously, the level of athletics was not the same at that time, so you know by default, this newer film was gonna wow you because football has evolved quite a bit over 30 years. But I was actually impressed with the fact that you don't see a lot of jump cuts. There's a lot of like continuous action. They play around a lot with the split screen stuff in the first movie, and I thought that was a kind of really smart and fun way to shoot that because you know you're getting this football action, which, as you mentioned, wasn't necessarily the greatest, but then you're seeing crowd reaction shots, you're seeing cheerleaders, you're seeing the warden's face, and it's a nice way of all right, we're not just watching football in this part. This is still a film, and the way the characters are experiencing this still matters. And I think the split screen was a very good way to shoot the football action in the movie.
So yeah, I love the split screen. That was a really cool addition. It came out of nowhere. They didn't do any split screen earlier in the film, and then all of a sudden, in the middle of the football game, you get all this split screen. You know, there's a lot of things happening in every frame, so your eyes are just you're just engaged visually.
Absolutely.
And it's really exciting to watch. And they did it in the remake. I was happy to see that. I was really thrilled.
The football in the new film is so much more believable, and I think it's because when you look at that cast, many of them played football at a high level. Terry Crews, I believe, was an NFL player for a while. Bill Goldberg, I think he played for the Vikings for a minute. So, like, there were guys, I mean, obviously there were other football legends in the film as well. But, like, there were guys who, like, played professional football. And even though it was past their time, sort of like a Paul Crew, they're not, like, currently football players. But, like, they know how to move. They know how to play football. So, you know, that played well, made it much more believable that these guys could win a football game.
Well, there were also football players in the original, but I think it goes back to what you said. The game has evolved a lot since then, so it's just more impressive what football players are doing in the 2005 film as opposed to the 1974 one.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually, from a film perspective, and I know it's just part of the screenplay, I like what they did with the scoring there. You know, as silly as it sounds, being down a certain amount of touchdowns versus, whether it's 3 touchdowns or more, like it's actually believable that you could come back 21 points. They play really well with the margins of the spread because both films attack this idea of the warden wants a 21-point spread, which I think when you're talking about a halftime in a football game, very easily you can get back into a football game from that scoring. So it's a small detail, but I like that they explored that. In the remake, remind me if this happens, but in the first film, there's a nice little touch where they do a drop kick.
Yeah, there's definitely a drop kick in the original. I've never seen that. I'm not really familiar with that. I just got into football recently, so I'm not really familiar with it. Well, and they definitely don't do that in the remake. They kind of do this weird play where they're all lined up on one side and they're just blocking for a runner or something like that.
Yeah, that's kind of like their take on it. So I used to play rugby, and drop kicks come into play a lot more. Football has some aspects of rugby that kind of kept over throughout the years because football really evolved out of it. But there have been drop kicks in football games fairly recently. I think there was actually one within the past year or so. But Doug Flutie famously did a drop kick in a football game, and it's a legitimate play. It's still in the rule book. You can drop the football on its nose and then kick it through the uprights for 3 points, just like you're kicking a field goal. You almost never...
So why not just kick a field goal? I'm confused.
That's a great point.
Maybe that's why they do it in the remake. Well, why not just kick a field goal if you can? Why do you have to do this dramatic drop kick thing? Like I said, I don't really know about that drop kick rule. So
that's actually a good point. I was like, oh look, cool, a little bit of football history, something that's still in the rule books. And like when Canal was like, what the hell was that? And he was like, it's a drop kick for 3 points. You're right. Why are they doing that? Because you could just
field goal's a lot easier, and you don't have to rush. Why not just do a field goal regular? I don't know.
No.
I'm fine with it. I was just a little confused by it.
Yeah, I thought it was fun, dude.
I liked it. Sorry.
No, but you're right. It is a thing that whenever it does happen, because it does happen from time to time. Whenever it happens, all the commentators like to say, "Huh, did you see that? That's still in the rule books. You can still do that." But you're right. Why would you do it? Because there's a lot of other things that you can do that are more effective.
I definitely like the football in the remake. It seemed a lot more fun.
Mm-hmm.
I think part of that was just there was no music, I don't think, or there was barely any music if there was any in the original. But you definitely had music in the remake. You had good old AC/DC in there, not once but twice.
Yeah.
Put in Thunderstruck by AC/DC, and I couldn't believe it because I was like, Varsity Blues put Thunderstruck in their movie, their football game. So it's like, come on, remake. There's so many AC/DC songs. You had to pick the same one that was used in Varsity Blues. I mean, I'm fine with it because I like AC/DC, but
they're great for football montages. Back in Black, like that's a great football song.
The other song they used in the movie was If You Want Blood, which makes sense. But yeah, they had more fun songs in the remake. They had the dramatic orchestral score going on for like those desperate moments when they needed like certain plays. The drama played a lot better. The action played a lot better. Everything about that football game, I feel, was pretty much done better in the remake.
I can certainly see that using the score to their advantage was huge. Even leading up to the football game, when the warden does hose down the field, and they're all playing like that muddy, sloppy football game, there's music in the background. They use some slow motion in there, and you get this sort of emotional camaraderie that's portrayed very well with the music beats that are happening in the background. And you're right, just like in the action of the game itself at the end, that it plays well and it helps the audience really get into it.
Throughout the film, going back to the music, I think the remake handles the music a lot better. It's able to convey the emotions, the drama a lot clearer. Maybe in the 70s they just didn't have it down right with the music, just being able to sort of elevate what's happening. But it's definitely done a lot in the remake, and it's easier to follow, I guess, for our modern cinematic sensibility. It just makes it more sense to us, whereas like the original, there would be a lot of just quiet moments, and you just sort of have to take the scene for what it is. But the remake uses the music, which can be considered lazy, but I like it. I like having the music kind of, this is a dramatic moment. I don't mind those.
I think it worked.
My hand held sometimes.
Yeah, no, I agree, because I think it worked, because like a lot of times when you're watching movies that have sports in them, it's hard to get into something that like has no real weight or reality. Like when you're watching professional sports, you want to know who's going to win because ultimately it matters in the end who's going to the Super Bowl or something like that. But in a movie, there's a predetermined outcome and they have to really engage you to make you want to watch um, essentially fake football. That first film, the length of the game itself is wild.
Yeah, it's like over 40 minutes.
It's like I could just go watch football right now. Because the Sandler remake, I think tops that football scene is about 17 minutes. All said and done, and that is all we need. Did you score some points? Did they score some points? And then you had a dramatic speech. You slow motion that big play at the end and done. Like we do not need to see 40 minutes of football in a major motion picture. It's that's not worth it. But no, you're right. Smart editing.
It just feels longer too, because like I said, there's no music playing, so you're literally kind of watching football for a while.
Yeah.
Like you said, it's this fake football you have to watch, so it's not even as entertaining as if you're watching real football. So it does drag on a bit at the end there.
I will say though that because this episode was inspired by the most recent football, both of these films were better than the Super Bowl this year.
Oh, come on. It was a defensive game. If you like defense, you had a good time.
Yeah, I don't know about that, Dan. It's,
I get what you're saying, though, yeah.
Well, the new football rules are geared towards offense so much that it's actually almost impossible for a game to have been that low of a score. But,
scoring Super Bowl ever. So.
It is what it is.
Hey, another year of the Patriots, huh? Hey.
Yep. Hey, what? Next time you're thinking about watching the Super Bowl, just watch The Longest Yard because it's going to be a much more fun time.
It's crazy, too, because there's a lot more football in the original. But oddly enough, they don't actually show you every touchdown the Mean Machine, the convicts make.
Right.
Which I thought was a weird thing. I thought they would, especially when they were doing their comeback, that they would actually show you every touchdown, but they don't. One touchdown happens where there's a conversation between Gransville and Nate in the hospital. Like, suddenly the score's up by 7 as soon as we're out of the hospital. I was like, whoa.
Yeah.
They didn't show it, which I thought was weird. In the remake, they definitely show you every single touchdown, just to keep it entertaining.
For sure.
It's weird that they would show you the non-entertaining, the no points part in the original, but when the points happen, they're going to show you a different scene. So I definitely appreciate what they did in the remake there.
And I know we're talking about like physically watching the game itself, but I think in both films, what the games are doing for the inmates, like people are milling about and they're watching it in the stands. Some people are listening to it on the radio. I think in both films, it's really nice to see how the inmates are being affected by the game going well for their comrades. Kind of a crazy beat that in the remake, this is on ESPN2?
Yeah, there was like a brief mention, like the warden and his confidant had a little conversation about like, yeah, this is going to be possibly televised on ESPN2. It's like, that could really help me in my political career. Yeah. And it was just, now it's televised.
Yeah.
I feel like that.
Which I guess they make that reference so that they could have Chris Berman do the commentary, but at the same time, it's kind of weird. It's like, I don't think that would ever be shown on ESPN2, but okay. You never know.
Oh, yeah, going to the crowd reaction.
Yeah.
In the original, the crowd almost immediately is on the sides of the convicts, the Mean Machine team. Sure. They're cheering for them. They're kind of booing the guards.
Sure.
But in the remake, the crowd's booing the convicts. And it's not till the end of the game when they kind of turn around and they start rooting for these underdogs, these convicts, which made more sense to me. It didn't make sense that they were immediately cheering the convicts in the original. That's
true. It does make more sense in that scenario. And honestly, I think the remake does a good job of... The convicts are playing dirty as hell at the beginning of the game. I mean, like, they're not outclassed on that first touchdown that the guy runs back like a 90-yard kickoff, they're just beating people up and not caring at all about who has the ball or really about the rules of the game. So it it would make sense that an audience watching that at first wouldn't be behind them, and that they would have to sort of gain that sort of trust back or gain that respect from the audience. So yeah, it makes a lot more sense to do it that way as opposed to just, oh, the prisoners are playing, we like them, which almost would never happen.
Yeah, it also makes sense that in the remake that the convicts are just out for blood in the beginning. Like the guards are able to score they're able to score 2 touchdowns right away because all the convicts are concerned about is just taking out a specific guard, which is why they signed up too, right? That was their motivation. I could take out this guard. So it made sense that they weren't playing football right away. They were just out for blood. In the remake, I feel like they weren't out for blood as much. They were more about the football. They weren't so much about getting these vendettas.
Yeah.
So it made sense that Adam Sandler's crew had to be like, come on, guys. Like, you get a broken bones heal. Like, we got to hurt these guys. We want to hurt them. We got to win this game. So I like that from the remake.
Yeah.
That they went there.
I liked at the end of the film, like, I think it's Chris Berman, but he basically sort of just breaks down like kind of the absurdity of the plot of the film. A bunch of convicts just took out like the protectors of our justice system, and it's just like to like comedic effect. I wish I had the exact quote, but like it's just so funny that it's like, yeah, this is actually ridiculous. Like a lot of those guys are in jail for some pretty heinous stuff, and you're right. By the end, the crowd is totally with them. But there's like a moment where there's a self-realization in the new film of just like almost how absurd that concept is. At the end of the day, I think people like underdogs, and sometimes they're like sticking into the system, and that's ultimately what like The Longest Yard is sort of about.
Yep. We could talk about some of the jokes that were thrown in the remake that aren't in the original.
Sure.
We could talk about the gay inmates. The cheerleaders?
Sure.
How they're used a lot more in the remake as opposed to the original?
Yeah, the original sort of... It's actually surprising, like they're at the game and really the first that you see of sort of gay inmates or the cheerleaders at the game itself. But, it's sort of an aside. Like, okay, they're there cheerleading. There's a segment where they're sort of dressed up sort of like Gladys Knight.
It's not just the cheerleaders. There's like this whole sort of Supremes trio out there, kind of singing.
Which I thought was fun. It's subtle, it's there, but they don't really dive that deep into it. Whereas like the remake, it's brought up several times throughout the film. Tracy Morgan plays a convict that who's gay in the film, and there's a lot of jokes that happen around that. I'm trying to think of a few if you had any.
Yeah, they're played for comedic effect, mostly at Brucey, played by Nicholas Turturro, I believe, for his expense. He's this he's really small inmate, but he's really like angry all the time, trying to be a tough guy. And then I guess the joke just keeps coming back around that like, well, you keep having sex with me. This is Tracy Morgan talking. He's like, what? That's a dude. I want to have sex with a dude. I love women.
Yeah.
And then it just keeps playing over and over again, which you can get a little tiresome, but I think it's pretty funny here.
Yeah.
That he like loves just having sex with Tracy Morgan throughout the movie. And that's also shown later when Adam Sandler is shown to do all his weird poses with Cloris Leachman. He's like, I got something to show you guys, and then he actually shows video of Brucey and Tracy Morgan like kind of hooking up too.
Right.
So there's a lot of funny stuff.
There's a scene where Tracy Morgan introduces the concept that like, hey, they could cheerlead for the game, and they spell out DIC.
And he's like, right before they spell the K, Adam Sandler's like, all right, thank you.
That's enough.
Yeah. And then Nick Turturro's character at the end of the game, he's like, please, I want to win this game. I'll be faithful to my wife. I'll stop having sex with black men. It's pretty funny.
Yeah. I think that, I don't know if you necessarily would get the same jokes in a more modern movie. Like 2005 was long enough ago where a lot of that played. And honestly, it didn't age out of the movie too poorly. Like it wasn't really at any point malicious from what I
It
could
wasn't
tell.
really homophobic or anything.
Yeah, it was
It just
just
played as like, like he just has like having sex with black men. He's so denying it. It's like just going up to it, dude.
yeah. So I mean, even in a way, it's like, yeah, well, like that's part of the culture. You know, Brucey is hooking up with Tracy Morgan throughout the game. You know, they have a place in the overall like system with everyone. So it wasn't like over the top homophobic. You know, maybe some of it wouldn't be as like politically correct today, but I don't think that it was necessarily harsh. You know,
Yeah.
watching it back.
Yeah, I don't think it'd be problematic, or I'm sure there's people that would find offense with it today, but I think most of the people would be okay with it. I don't think it's too bad.
I think it mostly came from a place of just pure comedy, not necessarily at the expense of those characters.
Yeah, if anything, it's at the expense of the guy who's just denying it.
Right. No, absolutely. Which I mean, honestly, when you think about it, it's just a smart choice for the screenplay and the director, because you again, you're hitting a lot of these older beats, and they're actually fleshing out these characters that are just kind of in the original, but like it's never really explained where they came from, or where the outfits came from. They're just there, and I think in the original, like the joke was just that they were there, but in the remake, they're like, okay, yes, they are here and they're cheerleading, but like let's flesh these characters out a little bit. Like, how did this even happen? You know?
Yeah, Blink in the original, you could almost miss them.
Yeah.
I definitely didn't like see them immediately. Go, oh, there's a bunch of dudes. I was like, after a few takes, I was like, wait, those are actually dudes.
Yeah.
And then I was like, oh wow, I didn't realize that the original would go there.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's definitely underplayed in the original, and then brought out for a little bit of levity and jokes in the original, the remake. I mean,
absolutely.
There's one thing I didn't like in the remake.
Okay.
Rob Schneider.
Oh my God, the Rob Schneider.
Oh,
dude, and just playing all the old hits. Oh, you can do it. I'm like, it was so unnecessary. It's like, I know him and Sandler are boys, and like that's how Rob Schneider keeps getting work, more or less. But it actually took me out of the film. I was like, this is ridiculous. Yes, there's a lot of jokes happening throughout the film, but it's still grounded in the struggles of these characters. And then now we just have this like, hey, this guy's making jokes over here. Like, it didn't make a lot of sense, to be honest.
Yeah, he's hitting the same "you can do a joke," which we've seen him do in pretty much every Adam Sandler movie since Waterboy. And then he does like, let's all take a shower together. And it's like, really? Come on, man.
Yeah.
Now that's the gay joke that's offensive.
Yeah,
right?
that you're right. That is the one gay joke that landed so flat, even in the movie, which is crazy that he even does it, because like the immediate reaction to the audience in the movie is just like, okay, like, dude, like, what was that? And he just kind of backtracks from it. So I don't know, Rob Schneider. I could go 100 more years of my life without ever seeing Rob Schneider again, unless it's Surf Ninjas.
Okay, I'll take him in Surf Ninjas 2. Absolutely. Or a Surf Ninjas remake. Oh, please do a Surf Ninjas remake so we can review that.
Yeah.
That would be amazing.
There's like 2 remakes I'm really hoping to happen, like Surf Ninjas 2, and I hope they actually do the Space Jam, because I think we could do a good job with Space Jam, since we are talking about sports movies right now.
Just going back to the cheerleaders again, in the remake, I do like there's this one funny beat where like one guy in the crowd, he's really getting into like the cheerleaders, and then his wife is like, "What are you doing?" It's like, "What?" Yeah, I was cracking up.
Yeah.
So yeah, again, I just think it's good old fun in the remake with the cheerleaders.
Absolutely, and there's more interactions with the guards too. I think I saw in one of your notes that the guards are on steroids at one point, and Sandler and crew are like switching out their steroids like estrogen and stuff like that. So there's jokes that happen there that aren't necessarily available in the first film.
Yeah, it's just adding a sort of a little joke that kind of plays out through the end of the film. That was a nice little touch there. I appreciated it. It was sometimes I didn't really laugh at it, but the other times I was like, oh yeah, that's pretty funny. Yeah. So it's appreciated. You got to add something to give it a little bit of a new flavor. So I thought it worked out pretty well. The estrogen. That guy was huge too. So just seeing this huge guy being all sensitive because of all the estrogen he's been taking worked.
Absolutely. And it adds this element of the inmates sort of directly messing with the guards before the game. You know, that they were trying to get an advantage the same way the prison guards were, and they were looking to sort of disrupt that side of the equation too, which I think fleshed out parts of the movie as well. Even if sometimes the jokes don't necessarily always need to land, but it shows you that these guys were really trying to win this game. Which like you get that they're trying to win the game in the first movie, but there's less opportunities for them to sort of mess with the guards, and I think that's a fun beat in the new film that actually sort of furthers the plot.
And just going back to motivations of the inmates, like in the original, they immediately kind of want to fight dirty during the football game. They're already doing the brass knuckles and everything.
Sure.
In the remake, they kind of handle it a little bit differently. They make the warden strike first by having the warden sort of soak their field up. And then it's at that point that they're like, all right, they're going to fight dirty, we're going to fight dirty.
Right.
So it kind of gives the cons a little more empathy, sympathy that they're doing these dirty things, putting the estrogen instead of steroids. So that made sense to do that in the remake. I like that.
Yeah, that's a good call. Whereas in the first film, this is their chance to get back at the guards, which is true in both films. But like because they have this opportunity, they immediately go towards dirty tactics, which I think maybe some of it is actually the way football was played at the time. That there was a lot of that sort of gamesmanship happening, even in the professional leagues, where you know these guys are putting plaster on their on the tape on their hands, like basically making hard objects to hit people with, like you said, the brass knuckles, which come back in the remake. But like you said, the warden strikes first, and I think that the screenwriter and the director are keeping the audience in mind with that. They're, like these guys aren't just dirty football players; they're defending themselves in that scenario in the remake. Whereas the original, they're like they're practicing like karate and trying to like do like little spine breaker stuff on people.
That was a little. That took me out of it a little bit.
Yeah.
I suppose it's like they're supposed to be these super hardened criminals, and then they're doing kind of silly things like karate.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, I guess I thought the inmates in the original were just a little scarier, tougher than they were in the remake. I think part of that goes because I don't know any of those actors, so I was able for me, I was able to believe them more that they could be inmates, as opposed to the remake where it's like, oh, there's a celebrity, there's another one.
Right.
I think the anonymity of the original cast played to the strength of them being more intimidating for me.
Sure. And then you have like a Terry Crews in the remake, who's a big guy. You know, he is an imposing figure, but he plays so many comedic roles that, you know, he's a big guy, but he's just like cracking a lot of jokes, so it takes away from the scary side of him. Whereas like in the in the original, you got this guy who like basically murdered 5 people, who's like doing Tai Chi in the yard, who's like ready to like kill at a moment's notice. And yeah, you're right, that guy is scary. He's not trying to be funny in the film, you know. Yeah, even like the big scary characters in the remake, they're playing like ping pong at points, you know, like the scare factor is dialed way down, even though arguably a lot of the people in the film are actually scarier people to run into on a football field.
Yeah, I think that kind of goes back to what you're saying, like when you saw the portrayal of each crew character, like Burt Reynolds gives you the vibe of the movie, Adam Sandler gives you the vibe, and Adam Sandler gave you the vibe that this movie's a little bit lighter, it's a little more fun, so it's not gonna be as intense or threatening as like the original. Yeah, got that lighter PG-13 rating as opposed to the harder R. So it definitely plays a little lighter, a little more fun overall.
Yeah, agreed.
I guess the last thing I really want to talk about is really minimal. It's just the sound effects.
Okay.
Just mostly going back to the football action. Just when everybody got hit, it just. I guess they didn't perfect sound effects back then because it definitely didn't match exactly the action that was happening. So, and then I guess that's expected of these older movies. Like when somebody gets hit, it's just going to be this same kind of abrupt that doesn't quite match the action sound effect, which was definitely improved
right
in the remake. And I was just really hoping that like, oh god, I hope they don't use the same sound effects.
Well, you know,
they're a little rough.
it shows you the advantage that a lot of times some of these remakes are going to have, just as film, and really in this case the sport that they're portraying modernizes. It gives, the modern directors chances to make improvements in those areas that a lot of times audience members and theater goers aren't paying attention to. People don't think about sound effects that much when they're watching movies, but if they're bad, it'll take you out of it very quickly. You know, a lot of times the things that you notice at least are the most important parts of film. And one thing I know for sure is that audio is huge. A movie can look gorgeous, but if it sounds bad, it's a bad movie. Not that this was a bad movie.
All right, so it's Judgment time.
Hey, Judgment
Reggie.
Time.
Yeah, we'll call it Judgment time. That's what I had in my head. Reggie, what do you think? Should they have remade The Longest Yard?
You know what? Because of the product that they presented us when it was all said and done, I would say yes. It it did a good job, especially in your case where now, because there was a remake, you went back and explored the first film, and the first film has a lot to offer and has a different tone. It's a little more serious. There's still jokes in that first film, but this new film takes the exact same subject matter, puts a modern twist on it, and turns it into more of a comedy. I love the ensemble cast. I was very impressed that they were able to make a movie like the one they actually ended up making here. I'm glad they did it. So this movie was definitely worth making, in my opinion.
Nice. When I finished watching the original film, I thought to myself, the remake really only has to do two things for me to like it. It has to do improve jokes and improve that football. And of course, like I expected, it was able to do both those things. So for me, yeah, I think a remake of this movie was absolutely a good thing to do. Like you said, I like the cast, the new ensemble. They play off each other really well. It's a lighter film. I think it plays better to what people expect from a sports comedy now. The other one, although it's still a sports comedy, it's not as comedic as I guess you would expect with modern sensibilities of what a sports comedy should be. It's a grittier film, and it definitely has a lot of things that I like, but I definitely also like the funnier tone of the remake, and it does not just that stuff better, but it also improved with the music, some better sound effects, and what do you have? You have Burt Reynolds in there. That's huge to me. Having the star of the former film in a huge role in the remake, he's giving the blessing that yeah, this is absolutely fine. You also got Ed Lauter in there from the original. This is a love letter to the original. It's trying its best to honor the original, and it does. For me, it worked. I mean, it could have explored some different areas. It could have strayed from the script. It does say really safe. I'd say it's not a great remake, but it's definitely a good one. So
Right.
for me, yes, this absolutely works. This 2005 remake.
Yeah, and I think what we're gonna find a lot of times with these remakes is that finding your own tone is huge. You're never gonna be able to sort of eclipse a movie that you're ultimately remaking. People liked it. That's why you're remaking it. So finding a way to take that, modernize it, give it your own tone. So taking a film that, yeah, it was a comedy before, but like now it's really a comedy. Making that change makes this work because it stands alone. Even if you never saw the first film, you can watch this and say, oh, that was pretty funny. I enjoyed that. Like I said, it doesn't fall into the great remake territory. Those are very rare. Very rare. But it does fall into, they did everything that they needed to do to make this a successful film. And, like I said, ultimately, I'm glad they did it. A lot of people that I like are in this movie. Joey Diaz from.
Yeah, we didn't even talk about him.
I know, we didn't even get into like the Joey Diaz stuff. He was great in this movie, and he talks about The Longest Yard in his podcast quite a bit. And a guy like that, this was a big opportunity for him. It was a big opportunity for a lot of people as they were trying to sort of launch their acting careers. So I'm glad that the film afforded them that chance.
Yeah, I think the most important part of a remake is to play for a modern audience. A lot of the stuff in the original might not carry over so well. We talked about the domestic violence thing. And, it just, for the modern cinema sensibility, it definitely plays well. It hits all the beats that it needed to hit, and they did the right thing.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, another episode in the bag.
Another episode in the bag. Yeah, so I mean, ultimately, turns out we both like The Longest Yard, which good flick. I'm glad that they did the remake. Next episode, here's what I'm thinking, man. I went through your list. Maybe we should watch Psycho.
Psycho. Ooh, is that Gus Van Sant who did the remake?
Was it a Van Sant remake? Maybe.
I think, because obviously you got Hitchcock, directed by Gus Van Sant. Yes.
Gus Van Sant, nice.
So we got the Hitchcock remake versus the Gus Van Sant. I have not seen the remake, and I only saw the original once when I was very young.
Yeah.
But this will be an interesting one because I heard it's almost frame by frame, like it's like a duplicate of the original.
Yeah, which we haven't gone into that territory yet. So I'm interested to see a film that is trying to do the exact same beats, just with a different cast. So I
Vince
think
Vaughn. Oh boy.
Vince Vaughn. Yeah, in a rare dramatic turn, I guess I really haven't seen a lot of that new film. I've seen bits and pieces of it, and it's always jarring to me when I'm watching it. So I think watching it fully through will finally get me over the Vince Vaughn is in Psycho hump that I've had over the past couple years. Now I'm looking forward to it, man.
Yeah, it'll be a good one.
So yeah, next episode, Psycho. Of course, Dan, if we missed anything, I think the audience can reach out to you because I bet your email works better than mine.
Or you could just my Twitter at Dan or no, my Twitter is at Console Wars Guys, so you can message me there. That's good.
Awesome. And if for whatever reason you want to reach out to me, I'm Reggie Parker at RP Comedy, rpcomedy.com. Thanks for listening. I'm Reggie.
And I'm Dan. And this has been
Retro versus Remake.